Hey guys, we're here with Tzeporah Berman. She's with the Fossil Fuel Non-Proliferation Initiative, Treaty Initiative. Thank you, Tzeporah, for being with us. And so you guys really want to tone down and eventually eliminate the use of fossil fuels. Talk to us about that. Why is that so important? Why do you think it's necessary, and how does it happen?
Well, look, these international agreements are complicated, and so is climate policy, but what's not is that 86% of the emissions trapped in our atmosphere, literally smothering the earth, causing the floods and the fires and the extreme weather and the storms and the heat waves, come from three things: oil, gas, and coal. And yet, after 27 years of negotiations here, we can't even get the countries yet to agree to include those words in the text. We know, and the science is very clear, that we need to stop expanding fossil fuel projects and wind it down in a way that is safe and fair and doesn't leave any communities behind. And if we're not planning for that, it's going to be even more difficult. So no one's saying turn off the taps overnight. We all use fossil fuels. But we need to stop expanding the problem, and we can't, because renewables are now cheaper than oil, gas, and coal.
Why isn't that happening naturally then? If it's cheaper to use other sources, why are people still using fossil fuels?
Because the market's distorted with fossil fuel subsidies. The IMF, the International Monetary Fund, now reports that governments are giving the big oil and gas companies $11 million a minute in fossil fuel subsidies. So we're propping up these companies, and so even though renewables are cheaper, they continue to expand the problem. So look, it's not a transition if we're growing the problem. And right now we're on track to produce 110% more oil, gas, and coal than can ever be burned on the surface of the planet, or it will burn us.
So where do these fossil fuel subsidies come in? Because I mean, I've seen subsidies for solar panels and windmills. How are the fossil fuel industries being subsidized kind of behind closed doors?
There's indirect and there's direct subsidies. So you have some things like subsidies that are direct well credits. So companies are being supported and subsidized in order to put in place infrastructure. Sometimes there's things like governments are actually paying for the infrastructure for them. My own government in Canada has bought the Trans Mountain pipeline so the oil sands could expand. So there's many different types of subsidies that the oil and gas industry is getting. But I think part of the reason we haven't seen the progress yet is not just because of the subsidies, it's also because oil and gas companies are very powerful. And while they say they're part of the solution and they believe in climate change, and in fact 80% of their ads say they're part of the solution and believe in climate change, 98% of their investments are in new oil, gas, and coal, because they're making record profits. So they're making record profits, but it costs us more every time we fill up at the pump. And we know that these products are killing us, literally killing us, not just climate change, but now the World Health Organization says that air pollution from fossil fuels is the greatest cause of death worldwide. 1 in 5 people die from air pollution due to fossil fuels on the planet. So we know we actually have the technology today for cleaner, safer systems, the electrification of transport, heat pumps that'll make it cheaper for us to heat our homes. But it's actually the fossil fuel industry that has been slowing us down in putting in place those solutions.
So I spent some time with some of the Africans earlier, some of the African delegations. Even the African Union put out a statement saying, like, look, we need to industrialize, we need to develop, and we're going to have to be burning fossil fuels, we're going to have to do oil. How do you recommend that move forward? I mean, should they develop in a different way? What do you do with that? Because I mean, they're dealing with poverty, they want to develop, and yet you're talking about the concerns about the health effects and the climate effects of fossil fuels. How do you balance those two things?
The fact is the fossil fuel industry has had decades to provide access to energy to the 600 million people across Africa who don't have any access to energy. They want to build more oil and gas projects in Africa, and they're saying they're for people across Africa. But the fact is, if you look at the projects, they're planning on exporting that oil and gas to Europe and other places, and they're also planning on taking the profits with them while they leave the polluted rivers in order to be cleaned up by African communities. So I really think the fossil fuel industry uses every excuse to argue that we should expand fossil fuels. But the fact is, their time is over. The technologies now exist to replace fossil fuels, and I think the world is waking up to the fact that they've been holding our policy hostage while they make the billions of dollars. And so what we need is for governments to put in place the infrastructure and the financial support for countries in the global south to leap right over the fossil fuel era and start putting in place distributed renewable energy systems because they're safer. They don't blow up. And the fact is, a solar spill, it's just a sunny day. Oil, gas, and coal is what is threatening our health and our climate, and it is the way we've powered our societies in the past, but it doesn't have to be the way we power our societies in the future.
So the Biden administration has taken some steps on this. They've canceled some pipelines. They've said no more leases on federal land, things like that. Are you pleased with the progress that's being made? And of course, the Europeans, they've shut down some coal-fired power plants and things like that, although now they're talking about energy shortages. They might bring them back online. Are you pleased with the pace that this is moving in Europe and the United States, or what are your thoughts on that?
I think the pace that things are moving in Europe is certainly better than the United States. I think we've seen a lot of progress under President Biden, but the fact is, even in the most recent decisions, the Biden administration allowed some loopholes in those decisions to support the oil and gas industry in developing what they call carbon capture and storage. Well, again, billions of dollars has gone into carbon capture and storage, and it's not delivering. It's expensive, and it's not available at scale, and it's being used by the fossil fuel industry as a promise of becoming clean, even though the numbers actually don't add up. It's being used as an excuse to expand fossil fuels, and the Biden administration is allowing new drilling. That has to stop. A number of European countries like Denmark, France, Spain have all now committed, in fact 13 countries have now committed to stop the expansion of oil, gas, and coal. And a number of countries have created a new initiative called the Beyond Oil and Gas Alliance that California has joined, and so recently has Washington State. So we're starting to see some states step up, but we still need the Biden administration to step up and recognize that they have to stop expanding oil and gas. And if they do that, they'll provide more certainty to the marketplace, and they'll get more investment in the renewables that they claim to support.
Do you think they'll hold the line? I mean, there's a lot of predictions coming out now about the winter being really tough in Europe and also parts of the United States. They're even talking about blackouts now. Do you think they'll be able to hold the line? What do you do with that?
Yes, I think what Germany is doing is probably right. There are a couple of coal plants that they're going to have to turn back on. But they have explicitly said this is for a defined period of time, and they've actually made their target dates and for emissions reductions more ambitious. So they haven't moved away from a lot of the targets that they have. They're aggressively putting in place heat pump programs and other programs to help communities stay warm and use less fossil fuels. But in the short term, because of Russia's war in Ukraine, they are going to have to provide more fossil fuels for energy. But the fossil fuel industry saying that Russia's war on Ukraine is a reason to build more gas and LNG is absurd, because by the time you finish building those huge multi-billion-dollar infrastructure projects, it's too late to provide short-term support to Europe or anywhere else that's being squeezed by Russia. So if we're going to build new at this moment in history, let's build new clean infrastructure, the energy of the future and not the energy of the past. Because if we're still using as much fossil fuels in 2030 and in 2040 as we're using now, then more people will suffer. Right now, one person, here we're standing in Africa, and one person every 36 seconds dies in the Horn of Africa as a result of climate-induced drought. It's not just in Africa. Look at the fires in California or the floods across the United States.
So the elephant in the room here is, of course, China. They're building coal-fired power plants very, very rapidly, drastically increasing their CO2 emissions. How does that fit into this puzzle? I mean, this whole COP27, that seems to be really the big issue. They already put out more CO2 than all of the Western countries combined, and they're bringing hundreds of new coal-fired power plants online. Obviously, that's going to put a lot of CO2 in the atmosphere. Can anything be done, or should anything be done to rein that in?
Look, every every ton of carbon at this moment in history matters. That's absolutely correct. However, China is also building more renewable energy, more solar, more wind power than any other country. And they're starting to put in place the building blocks to get off oil, gas, and coal. So it's not all bad news from China. They're committing to ban the fossil fuel car. They've set dates for it. They're building more electric vehicles than any other country. They're building more solar panels than any other country. The problem is China is just so big. They're building more of everything. So that's definitely true. But they have committed to move forward on climate change, and they're shifting global markets because they're so committed to developing the electrification of transport and renewables. So I think we're seeing a both and right now from China, but I also think we're seeing some significant movement. How this all plays out, the geopolitics of energy and the et cetera, is anybody's guess. But at the same time, if you look at the long-term trends, even the International Energy Agency is now saying that demand for oil and gas is going to peak and decline this decade, that renewable prices have skyrocketed, and that this year there was more investment in renewable energy than there was in oil, gas, and coal, and that's the first time in the planet's history. So things are changing.
Interesting. The other big elephant in the room is, of course, American politics. The Republicans just retook control of the House of Representatives. Just this week, Donald Trump announced he's running for president again. He, of course, has famously called climate change a hoax invented by the Chinese to destroy the U.S. economy. What happens if, and actually another Republican congressman I just saw on Twitter right now, Thomas Massie of Kentucky, said the idea that CO2 is pollution is pseudoscience. What does the world do with Republicans in America who are not willing to put out money for loss and damage, who are not willing to change the energy grid? How does the world deal with that?
I think what's really important is that citizens in the U.S. recognize that this is the moment that they need to set up, to stand up. There are moments in history when our elected officials are too heavily influenced by those who stand to benefit from the status quo, and they don't act. We have seen many of those moments when women had to march to get to the right to vote, when many people across the United States fought for civil rights. I would say we need more people to be dusting off those placards, to be marching in the streets with our youth who are demanding action on climate change. I think that's absolutely critical. As we do that, that will create more social space for any party. And I think we need to be creating conversations across party lines, because this is not an issue of right or left. As Al Gore likes to say, it's an issue of right or wrong. And I also think it's absolutely critical that cities and states step up to the plate. Because in fact, cities and states can change a lot of laws that will have a tremendous impact in reducing our dependence on fossil fuels and fighting climate change, regardless if, again, we have a locked federal politics in the United States.
Fascinating. And so you guys are committed to the non-proliferation of fossil fuels. What are your thoughts on nuclear energy being part of the solution to shifting away? Is that something that you think is viable, or is that dangerous? What are your thoughts?
The Fossil Fuel Non-Proliferation Treaty Initiative focuses on the need to end the expansion of oil, gas, and coal and manage that wind down. And we've had tremendous support from around the world. 3,000 scientists who have joined the initiative, over 1,000 faith organizations that represent 1.2 billion people, even a cardinal of the Vatican, the World Health Organization, and now the first 2 countries who have proposed it. So we're really focusing on that because fossil fuels represent the majority of the problem on climate change. There are many, many solutions that are being proposed around the world, and we need to look to the scientific community in order to decide which solution is best in which place, and to support and to really make decisions based on evidence and science.
And do you think the technology is there now to enable the world to switch away from fossil fuels, or how long do you imagine that would take?
We know that the technology now exists for mass renewable energy and the electrification of transport, and every day it's getting cheaper. Battery storage, renewable energy is now cheaper than fossil fuels. There are some uses, of course. One just flew over us.
Yeah, right.
that we can't, that we know we don't have solutions for yet. Aviation is 2% of global emissions. So the majority of uses today for fossil fuels we have solutions for. So what's holding us back is not technology, it's political courage.
Fascinating. Anything else that I didn't ask about that you want to add?
think so. It's been
Very
a long day.
Thank you, Tzeporah. Appreciate it.